Hello.
Hello, everybody. It's Monday, April 13th, and welcome to our latest edition of Heady, Vermont's Mental Health Monday. I'm Kathy Bloom. This is Mark Nash, husband and psychotherapist supreme. Not my psychotherapist, by the way, that would be wrong, but the psychotherapist to many who appreciate everything he has to offer. So quick update before we get rolling on the mental health world. Heady, Vermont hosted our Women in Cannabis Summit over the weekend, online on Zoom, and despite some aggressive technical challenges, which I think came primarily from our inexperience and our attempt to use Zoom in ways it was perhaps not intended to be used, our speakers and volunteers were amazing. They were resilient and creative and completely on task for the day. We will be releasing the recordings from the whole day this week, and all of the folks who bought tickets will have access. And if you didn't get tickets, you can still get them at the event website, womenincannabis.headyvermont.com. I'll post the links below, and they'll all be available for at least 90 days. So tickets are $5 still for Heady Vermont members, $20 for the general public, and it's a full day of programming in 3 separate rooms, plus keynote address by Massachusetts Cannabis Commissioner Shalene Title, who had to call in on her phone because she was having technical difficulties, and some separate conversations in the afternoon that we had around environmental and social justice and gender equity. So it's juicy, and there's also local musician Julie Wynn played some music around lunchtime to ease people's spirits, and we were unable to post a relaxing video from Karen Santarello of Kamalika K Yoga, which we will include in the recording. So you can spend ages working your way through all of this incredibly valuable information that women from across the country in the cannabis community provided for us. So thanks again to all of our volunteers and speakers, and of course the sponsors. And personally, I have to offer a huge shout out to Heady Vermont CEO Monica Donovan and our marketing director, Erin Doble. Because, you know, for those of you who saw the movie Apollo 13, there's a moment, or one of the challenges they run into is that the CO2 scrubbers aren't working properly on the capsule, and the engineers at NASA have a tiny window to invent new scrubbers at whatever the astronauts might have had on hand in space, and teach them how to make them. Otherwise, the astronauts are going to die from too much CO2. Well, that's pretty much what was going on behind the scenes with Monica and Erin. And somehow, with duct tape and socks, they saved the day. And in the movie, the lead engineer gets called a steely-eyed missile man. It was the ultimate compliment. And this compliment gets repeated in the movie The Martian, for those of you who are space movie geeks. Well, I have to say Monica and Erin are totally steely-eyed missile women when it comes to dealing with these issues that we ran into. So bless them. They're taking the day off, as well they should. So here in Vermont, Governor Scott has extended the stay-at-home order until May 15th. And while the Vermont curve looks much better than original projections, there are indeed some serious concerns about what's happening with our incarcerated population and coronavirus making its way through the imprisoned population and the people who work there in the criminal justice system. There are a lot of people who could be decarcerated and safely enter the community. People who are older, who have health conditions, people who were imprisoned just because they didn't have money for bail. They were there for pretrial. They were incarcerated for parole violations. And while there are governors like the governor of Virginia, who is really in favor of releasing everybody who should have gotten out, who would be getting out within a year, and all of those other folks, Vermont, we're not really letting people go. So the ACLU of Vermont is leading the charge on this, and their website is acluvt.org if you want to get involved. And on a federal level, U.S. Postal Service is facing bankruptcy, and this is actually a serious social justice issue for people who don't have or can't use the internet. It's also a big issue for all of us if we're facing the need to vote by mail this fall. So this is something you can contact our congressional delegation about, of course, Senators Pat Leahy, Bernie Sanders, and Representative Peter Welch. So, to mental health and psychotherapist Mark Nash. I actually wanted to start here with a question for Mark, which comes straight out of current experience at Heady HQ, which is right upstairs right now. So yesterday we got what I would consider to be an email which used fairly aggressive language. It's from a member of the cannabis community, accusing us of not promoting some COVID-related information which they think would be valuable. And I understand that the aggressive language and the accusatory language came out probably of the fact that this person is stressed, wanting to save lives, feeling helpless in the face of a huge pandemic as well. But nevertheless, the language that they used felt icky and painful. And it's very easy to either think, fuck you, I'm not even going to talk to you, or to want to bite back somehow, to defend, to attack, and say, look, you have no right to use this kind of language, we're doing our best. But that would be both not professional and also not all that karmically positive. And so I can imagine a lot of people are experiencing heightened communications, like charged communications like that, either on a personal or professional level, just because everybody's freaked out and nobody is as grounded as they might be. So what do you do in the face of something like that? Because I can feel like my ego doesn't want to get around to just ignoring what was said and either, I don't know, apologizing or saying, yes, you're right, come join us. I feel like my ego wants to bite back and say, you have no right to treat us that way, la la la, but none of that strikes me as all that useful. So how do you negotiate an emotional situation like this?
Sounds like you already have. I mean, you have acknowledged that they're under stress. You've acknowledged that they may have a point that they're trying to make and just didn't do it in as elegant a way, and you've acknowledged that biting back would not be useful. So you have already done the work of choosing not to bite back. So what's your larger question?
Well, if I'm going to respond, how do I respond without, because I can feel I'm writing the email in my head, right. I want to put in a dig there somehow.
Gotcha.
I want to find a way to not be, I don't know, victimized by this experience somehow. Mm-hmm. I mean, that seems like strong language to use, mm-hmm. but I can tell I'm not emotionally past it to the point where I can find a way to engage in a productive way, because whatever they wanted us to talk about could very well be useful, but it's sort of like my ego doesn't want to give them the satisfaction. So how do I work through that? Or how would anybody work through that in a situation like this?
So let's break it down into its component parts a little bit. So first of all, somebody is mean to you, or you perceive somebody is being mean to you, it hurts.
Yeah.
That is an experience of pain that we're never going to be able to not feel. But often on top of that feeling of pain, when somebody's used aggressive or accusatory language, we will make up stories about what's behind that or the meaning of it. So the stories could be anything from, they're a jerk, they're an asshole, they're an awful person, and therefore they deserve to be punished and taught a lesson. Or we may make up a story that says, oh my God, they're right, I did something terrible, I feel guilty, I feel bad, and the responses to that are either to completely subjugate yourself and say, oh my God, I'm a terrible person, I'm so sorry, which probably isn't the case. It's probably not that you did something terrible or that you're a terrible person. Or, since you're feeling attacked, you want to defend yourself and attack back. Those responses of attack or submit come from these stories that we're telling about either the other person or yourself. So we have to get past the story to the objective reality, and the objective reality was email got sent, it hurt. That's it. So then what do you do with that pain? What was your question?
Well, it makes me think then that that hurtful language probably came, the sender had a story that they were cranking up around as well.
Exactly. They were looking at what you had done and made some assumptions about your approach, your intentions.
Our integrity, which I think is a big piece
That's
of
right.
where my emotional reaction comes
Sure,
from.
they saw you in a way that you didn't want to be seen. And that's their story. So you got to sit with the pain, you got to feel the pain, and you wait, first of all. Go ahead and write the email.
Right.
And then don't hit send for 24 hours. That's the bottom line.
Right.
And eventually you'll calm down. Or calm down suggests that you were overreacting. I don't mean to say that. Eventually the pain will subside in intensity. And then you want to think about how you want to respond in a way that maintains your relationship, maintains your professionality in this case, or if it's a personal relationship, maintains the bond that you have with that person. And one of the best ways to do that is to start with empathy. Mm-hmm. Really dig in and see if you can imagine where the other person is coming from. Whether they did it the way you would like it done or not, try to put that to the side and say, what did they want? What did they need? What need were they trying to address, as inelegantly or clumsily as they may have been doing so? And so you have empathy and you have compassion in the same way that you're not always as elegant or articulate as you would like to be in expressing a need. You can make room for another person to be less than perfect. If you can make that room, maybe you can see what that need was, what that underlying need was, and start your response from there. Hey, I imagine that what you were wanting was this. And then go from there.
That means having to confront all of the ickiest feelings that you have in a situation like that.
Yeah.
And acknowledge for me, it's like take a personal experience, acknowledge the fact that there's a side of me that really would love to bite back, that really would love to use all of my verbal skill to hurt and wound.
Yeah.
It's like recognizing that I have that in me, but I don't have to take action.
Yeah.
And I don't have to judge myself for having that in me.
No, when we feel attacked, whether it's intended or not, we have an adrenalized response, fight or flight, and that fight part of you shows up. It's your ego speaking and saying, I don't want to be seen in this way, I don't want to be treated in this way. And that's absolutely appropriate that you set boundaries about how you get treated, for instance, but it is not necessary or helpful to actually follow through on the attack part of it.
So you can acknowledge all of your inner experience, but make a conscious choice about how you're going to respond.
Yeah, it's the difference between reaction and response. Our reaction is inevitable, it's built in, we're going to have emotional reactions. It's just what happens physiologically and emotionally and psychologically. Then we sit with that reaction and then we make a conscious choice about how we want to respond. So it's shifting from the emotional brain to the rational brain. And
how do you get there? Because when you're in emotional brain, it's very hard to think clearly. Your more extreme responses feel like they would be utterly reasonable in the moment, and then afterwards you think, oh crap, I didn't mean to do that. But so like how do you cross that bridge?
Well, hence the 24-hour rule when it comes to email. When you're in that moment, if it's actually a in-person interaction and you're having that emotional interaction, the best you can do is notice the physiological response you're having. You're going to feel tense, you're going to feel worked up, you're going to feel adrenalized, and hopefully with practice you can say, oh, to yourself or even out loud, I'm having an emotional reaction right now, so I want to be really conscious of how I want to articulate my response.
So you don't just have to let whatever first arises out.
That's right.
In the way that it wants to come out.
That's right.
And when the stakes are high, when you do feel attacked, it makes it that much harder.
Exactly.
I know you wanted to get to larger issues of mindfulness today, but I did have one very specific question. It occurred to me that it's always a little bit surprising when the emotions that I'm feeling are physically painful. My heart hurts, my belly hurts, my shoulder hurts. My emotional life seems to like to travel all around. Why is there a physiological experience and expression of an emotion? Why are we wired that way? What's going on?
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, it's adaptive in that it, I think, helps us pay attention to what's going on.
We call them feelings, I guess, because we
feel them.
them.
Yeah, an emotion is a physiological response to an experience that we then give meaning to.
I think somehow we don't often make that connection. That somehow our emotions, our responses are happening intellectually somehow, and that when things pop up in our body, it's weird.
Right.
It's somehow not. There's a disconnect there.
Well, sometimes you'll even ask somebody. They'll say they got angry, and I'll say, where do you feel that anger? And they're like, well, in my head. And what they mean is that they're thinking about the thing that they're angry about, but if they thought about it more specifically, they would probably feel their anger in their chest or in their stomach or tension in their shoulders or whatever it is. And so, we have to get in touch with the physiological response, and that's how we know we're having an emotion. The other thing about emotions are objectively real. They are a physiological response. Then we add a subjective twist to them about why we're having that emotion, the thoughts we have about that emotion, the stories that we're telling about that emotion.
The judging of ourselves, the narrative about the other.
That's right.
And as opposed to just being able to sit with our emotional experience.
I'm having a feeling. I'm feeling uncomfortable. There is an experience of discomfort in me, and it doesn't mean anything other than I'm having a feeling.
It makes me think that there's definitely a mind-body split in our culture. The idea that we wouldn't feel emotion in our bodies, when in other cultures, in Elizabethan England, they believed you could die of heartbreak.
Right.
That it was much more tangible, and there was a sort of what am I thinking of? A metaphor, not a metaphor. It was like their worldview was that we are fully integrated beings. Here in the modern West, we tend to have a dichotomous split between mind, between body, between spirit and our emotions, our emotional life, when in fact that is a distortion.
Yeah, oddly enough, we even think that emotions are not to be trusted, and that somehow our rational selves are our best selves. But we can't survive without our emotions, and our emotions are going to be more trustworthy ultimately because they are objective. You can't argue with a feeling.
So, thank you. You wanted to get to mindfulness.
Well, the segue is pretty good because mindfulness is basically about paying attention to what's going on with your feelings and with your thoughts. And I also wanted to loop back to what you were talking about in terms of having an emotional reaction to something and then how you respond to it. There's a Buddhist saying, or sort of the Buddhist bumper sticker, which says, pain is inevitable, suffering is optional. So they make this distinction between pain and suffering, and I alluded to it earlier, where pain is the feeling that you have, and then suffering is the story that you tell about it that often intensifies the pain.
So pain could be anything. Pain could be heartbreak or embarrassment. Pain could be you broke your leg skiing. Whatever. Pain is pain, basically. Yes. You're not making any kind of distinction.
Well, I would make a distinction between emotional and physical pain in this case for this discussion.
Okay.
Sadness, anger, hopelessness, guilt, frustration.
All of which might be coming up for people right now.
Right. Impatience, all of those, what we call the difficult emotions. Not the negative emotions, because we don't want to say some emotions are better than others. We need them all. They're all helpful. They all give us cues. But where we get ourselves into trouble sometimes is we'll have a feeling, And then the first story we'll tell about it is, well, I shouldn't be feeling this way. You can't help it. You don't get to choose your emotions. You do get to choose a little bit how you interpret them, how you assign meaning to them. So for instance, as we are in isolation, social isolation, we can feel some sadness about not being able to connect with people as much. But then we'll start to tell stories about that sadness. Stories like, well, I'm going to lose my closeness with my friends. I'm going to lose my whole social circle. Or I won't be able to stand this for much longer. We don't know that those things are true. Those are just ideas that our minds are coming up with. Most often, the suffering has to do with either projecting into the future, believing that some bad thing is going to happen, and we suck at predicting the future.
So, speaking of which, Mark and I talk a lot about this. All of the articles that you read in media predicting what's going to happen in a highly definitive way are misleading because no one can predict the future.
Right. Pundits especially are in the business of predicting the future, and when they're wrong, they never go back and say, oops. And when they're right, they like to tout that. Yeah. But I'm guessing that pundits are wrong about 90% of the time, because who can really predict the future, especially specifically? So worry is about predicting the future and making up stories about all the bad things that are going to happen. We don't know. We can plan for those things as best we can, but ultimately we've got to sort of say, well, we don't know.
Often the thing we're worried about isn't actually what happens.
That's right. And then a lot of pain also comes in the flavors of things like regret, guilt, resentment. Those are often past-based. We have stories about how we shouldn't have done a certain thing, or the other person shouldn't have done it. Well, it doesn't really matter, though. It's happened. And so the purest form of mindfulness is about being aware and being in the present moment, and about not judging that present moment. It is the case that we are sitting at home, isolated to some extent, sometimes lonely, and that can feel bad, but we don't have to make up a big story about how the world is ending.
Right. Or I'm going to be lonely forever.
That's
or this
right.
is never going to change.
That's right.
And you've talked about this before, but the notion that whatever you're experiencing, no matter how powerful it is, will shift, will transform.
Yeah, that's another thing I'll just sort of toss in. I know we need to finish up here, but there's a saying, what we resist persists, and that is the case with our uncomfortable emotions. If we try to bury our emotions, if we try to deny our emotions, if we judge ourselves for having our emotions, in any way try to make our emotions go away, they will stick around longer. If we can just sit with the fact of, oh man, I am really uncomfortable now, I'm really sad, or I'm really frustrated, or I'm really scared. If you accept that, eventually, like the weather, it always passes.
Like the weather, which is gray and rainy and kind of humid today. Mark, thank you once again. So if you have questions for us, for Heady, for Mark, you can email info@headyvermont.com, or you can email Mark directly.
marknashvt@gmail.com.
Very, very happy to help. And stay healthy, stay safe as best you can. And any final words of wisdom for our viewing public here?
No.
All right. Well, thank you all for joining us today, and we wish you all the best.